Hello, today we are reading chapter 13 of H.L. McCutcheon's Lightland, and we're reading the chapter entitled Fireflies, as you can see. So, when Lottie and the Night King had both grasped the corn husk sack and vanished from Lightland, Lewis had collapsed in the grim room at the center of the windmill fortress. He pounded the stone on the floor where they had disappeared. October Mouse had said nothing. The veil of oblivion had been secreted away safely. That had been their mission, but it had cost Lewis his Lottie cook. And without her, could they be strong enough to fight the Night King when he returned, as surely he would? A long time went by. The voices that always filled the air inside the windmill seemed to grow louder. The fortress continued to shake and rumble. The mouse felt certain it would collapse on top of them, but he would not disturb his friend in despair. Finally, Lewis stood. The mouse scrambled up his leg and climbed into his pocket. Lewis walked methodically through the corridors and down the unsteady stone steps. He saw no sign of anyone. The stones quivered under his feet. At one point, they passed through the archway. The room just behind imploded with a crash of dust and flying rock. October trembled and hid his face, but Lewis didn't even seem to notice. When they finally stepped out of the fortress, the air outside revived them both. It was cold and clean. It smelled windmill blade. It smelled green, like things growing. A steady wind blew, but the windmill blades did not move. The unsettling of the foundation must have jammed them. Already they looked crooked and bent. Lewis walked back out across the stones that were etched deeply in the cryptic marks that looked like the ones in his notebook. He grimaced as he stepped on them. It was the end of the day. The sun was slipping away to the west. This was the time when all good creatures in Lightland fled below ground to find safety for the night. October shivered and worried. His friend Lewis was not going to hide ever again. October felt sure of it. A bird called high above them, sent by Umber, no doubt. It was a large crow. Coal-black crow. October recognized her. The bird circled and seemed to be signaling, but didn't come close. As Lewis and October looked up at the late afternoon sky, there was a great roar. The windmill moved. It shook and shimmered in the twilight. Then it collapsed. The deafening sound of those massive stones crashing down pounded against Lewis's eardrums, and he stumbled backward. When it was all still again, the pile of dust and pebbles looked like the relics in the weaver's backyard in Iowa, and it was silent. The voices were gone. Lewis gasped. He looked and blinked, unable to believe his eyes. Coal-black crow circled one last time and then flew off. She would report this news to Robert and Umber. Finally, Lewis turned and stumbled away. October rode silently in his pocket. Lewis was numb. He just walked. He came to the massive cornfield and kept walking through it. And then he saw a tree in the far distance. He didn't stop, but a small smile crossed his face. Lewis walked and walked as if he were walking home. The corn still smelled sweet to him, although it was turning dry and brown. Fallen stalks crunched under his feet. He had to push the slanted stalks out of his way with each step. When he came out to the other side, the sun was truly setting. The yellow light was suddenly hot and intense in his face. The only thing breaking up the strong rays was Lottie's cherry tree straight ahead. Lewis felt his pulse race and walked steadily to it. When he arrived, he knew for certain why he'd been walking, because there in the clover under the tree, not sleeping and not awake either, was Lottie. The light of the setting sun beat down on her through the branches. Her favorite lavender pajamas were filthy. The hem was ripped loose. Her face was cut and dirty. Lewis had never been so glad to see someone in his life. It took a while to get Lottie to answer him. She was in a daze. She didn't understand that she was back in Lightland. When he touched her arm, she whimpered in pain. Lewis still had the yellow cloth hanging from his pocket. He pulled the fabric apart at the seams. It tore easily into a long, smooth piece. Without a word, Lewis fashioned a sling and eased Lottie's arm into it. Lottie's eyelids fluttered, and she realized that she was back with Lewis. She was too weak to talk. He helped her sit up, propped against her tree. She faded in and out of awareness. As Lewis tried to make her comfortable, he felt something twisted up in Lottie's polar fleece pocket. He untwisted it and was startled when his own notebook tumbled out onto the cold ground. It had changed. Something magical had happened. The cover had turned the color of pure silver. Lewis kneeled and opened the small book. The symbols were gone. Where there had been squiggles and sketchy marks were now words of his own handwriting. It was a story. It was, Lewis realized with a gasp, the story of everything he knew. He had been writing it all along. He sat in stunned silence, reading the story that he had not known he was writing, the story he had never heard before and yet knew by heart all the same. October Mouse gently slid to the ground. The thoughtful creature did not disturb either Lottie or Lewis, who were both lost in their own words. The brave mouse would have fought to the bitter end anyone who dared try to disturb the two children. Suddenly, something flew past October's face, a glowing, humming spark of light, a firefly. It was twilight. The stars were just beginning to come out. October had never seen the night sky. The mouse gasped at the sight of the first star he had ever seen, glimmering up there in the velvety blue blackness. How beautiful! October turned to look at the other half of the endless sky, and there, above the top of the rumble of the windmill, the full moon glowed. It looked just exactly like a bowl of custard. Lottie wavered in the gathering darkness between knowing where she was and having absolutely no idea. She felt, though, she was floating along with the easy quiet of the evening. The battle was over. She didn't really know how it had turned out, but she had done her best. The feeling gave her peace of mind for the first time in days and days. She floated on it. Lottie soon realized that she wasn't dying or even dreaming. Louis stayed by her side, holding his transformed journal. Something gnawed at Lottie's mind. Louis? She whispered. Yes. He came back after me. Back to Iowa. Louis nodded. I thought so, he said. Louis, Lottie whispered, and felt her throat closing up. Yes? I don't know where he is. He might be dead, or he might not. Louis nodded. It would matter a great deal one way or the other whether his father was still alive, but they would have to face that another night. Not this night. As the evening gave way into real darkness, something else happened. The silence gave way as well. At first it was an owl, the same owl actually, who had noticed Louis the first night that he entered Lightland. Whoo! Whoo! And then a nightingale song, so pretty that it made October ache with love for it. And then other noises that the Nightland had not known in years. There were voices, and even someone singing. Lottie and Louis squinted to see Robert was coming. He carried a torch and led a small group of citizens of Lightland. They were wide-eyed and wearied and seemed not to believe what they saw. Who are they? Lottie wanted to know. Are they out of hiding from the night rooms below? Are they more victims of the Night King in his veil? The torches were sunk into the ground, and others were hastily fashioned out of cornstalks by Robert and Louis to make a wide glowing circle around the tree. Robert kept wandering from the light of the circle to the night sky more clearly. Then he came to the center to speak, and his voice was clear and calm. My friends, he said, looking to turn at Lottie, Louis, October, Number. I feel as though I have returned from a long voyage. I have back every moment of my life, every memory, every story, every precious thing. Lottie could hardly believe this was the same boy she had seen mumble in his sleep that very first time in the night room. Now all of Lightland is ours again. Not only is it sunlit days, but it's sparkling nights, and we are strong and whole again. As Robert spoke, Louis noticed that the crowd below the tree was growing. There were people coming from all directions. He saw a yellow-haired woman with tears in her eyes slip into the circle next to him. The woman watched Robert speak, and her face glowed with pride. We celebrate tonight, but we must also swear to be watchful. Never again can we let a tyrant divide us by stealing our greatest strengths. The crowd cheered, and someone called out, Is he dead? Is he truly gone? All eyes turned toward Lottie and Louis. Louis shook his head, raising his eyebrows. Lottie looked downward and shrugged. They simply didn't know. The residents of Lightland were frightened. The veil! Where's the veil? Has it really been destroyed? Robert stepped back and gestured towards the tree. There in the branches, a red flame shimmered. The veil of oblivion hung from the cherry tree, its ends streaming in wind. A hush fell over the crowd, and then the quiet broke with a loud roar of voices. They were afraid. Quiet, friends, Robert called. Peace. And the crowd quieted. Umber made his way to Robert's shoulder. We do not know how to destroy the veil, but I believe that only Louis can be charged with removing it from Lightland. The crowd turns its eyes on Louis. Yes, he answered in a clear voice. The Night King was my father, but I am no longer his son. Lottie's eyes widened as she watched Louis speak to the crowd. Not only speaking, he was brave. It was true, of course. Louis had never before thought of himself as the brave one. That was Lottie. But in Lightland, he had stood alone, face to face with the Night King. At that moment, Louis had realized that he was braver and stronger than anyone could have ever imagined. If I can find my way out of Lightland, Louis continued, I will carry the veil away with me. The crowd was divided. Some cheered Louis, another chattered nervously. If he can, what does he mean, if he can? Lottie walked over to the next to their friend. There was something in her hand. I have a way home, Louis. It was the corn husk sack. Louis wrapped the yellow bandage strip that used to pick up the flaming fabric of the veil. Lottie touched the same yellow flannel that was binding her arm. Was surprised she realized it was no longer throbbing. The soft yellow sling comforted her. I don't want to take my sling off yet, she said. No, that's all right, said Louis. Mine is enough. Louis held his unwrapped hand up for the mouse to see. October was delighted and bobbed up and down. Louis's hand looked good as new. If you examined it very, very closely, there were only the thinnest of scars. Carefully, Louis folded the red, shimmering veil of oblivion into the smallest possible bundle. It still made his fingers tingle and tremble, but it no longer had the same hold that it had been before. It didn't affect his mind. Louis tied it securely with soft yellow strip of cloth. October helped as Louis wrapped the yellow flannel around and around until no red showed through it all. Umber couldn't help but shudder as Louis slipped the wrap bundle inside of his shirt. The bird had suffered enough just holding the hated thing in the three-clawed claw. Nothing could make him put it near his heart like that, but Louis didn't mind. Actually, it made him feel stronger. It was now time to go home. Lottie carefully spread the corn husk sack on the ground, and they all gasped. The sack was torn. Down at the bottom, there was a fist-size hole, almost as though a bite had been taken from it. Lottie trembled as she remembered. At home, the giant room, the Night King, had a hold of the sack, too. I tugged it away from him, but it must have ripped. Will it still work, she asked. Yes, Louis answered so definitively that they were all surprised. He knelt down, hunched over, tugging on the corn husk. He twisted and tied. By the time he sat up, the sack was whole again. The bottom had a wave to it, like the top of a cornfield, straight, but not quite straight. They all nodded at one another. Then, without needing to say goodbye, Lottie and Louis slipped their arms into the sack. They thought they heard Xerox growl, and Lightland was gone, but not forgotten. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will finish the book tomorrow.